Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to radically reframe a piece of literature you probably only think you know. We're taking an ancient classic, 1001 Nights, and we're going to look at it not as some quaint collection of fairy tales, but as a highly calculated, high-stakes survival strategy, in, honestly, a masterful structural optimization play. Okay, let's dive right into this by asking a question that I am absolutely sure hits close to home for a lot of us. Why is it mathematically impossible to turn off a streaming show at 2 a.m.? Right? Why is it that when the screen goes black, our brains practically force us to hit next episode? Well, what's fascinating here is that this modern binge-watching psychology, it's not some new phenomenon cooked up by Silicon Valley. It's actually an ancient psychological hack originally engineered over a millennium ago as a desperate survival tactic just to buy 24-hour life extensions. To really understand how, we've got to travel back in time. Section 1, the hook and the hardware. To understand this narrative hack, we first need to examine the physical infrastructure, the hardware, if you will, of the 8th to 9th century Middle East. Because during this specific era, this region established itself as the absolute commercial and scientific headquarters of the planet. Let's just put a single number into perspective to wrap our heads around this. 1 million. That was the staggering population of the metropolis of Baghdad during the Abbasid Caliphate. While much of Western Europe was dealing with severe urban regression at the time, Baghdad was this thriving, hyper-cosmopolitan metropolis. And this brilliantly illustrates a stark contrast in the global landscape back then. You had Western Europe managing decentralized feudal systems on one side, and on the other, you had the Abbasid Caliphate acting as a massive hub for the cross-border network of the Silk Road. And the merchant rest stops and souks of this empire, international traders weren't just exchanging spices and silks, they were actively trading folklore, administrative myths, and regional narratives. Now, what absolutely accelerated this exchange was a massive technological disruption. Back in the 8th century, Islamic forces captured the specialized data recording technology of paper manufacturing from Chinese prisoners of war. Paper was incredibly cost-effective compared to things like Egyptian papyrus or leather. This technological leap essentially democratized manuscript duplication. It allowed massive institutions like the House of Wisdom in Baghdad to translate, verify, and scale cross-border data at an unprecedented rate, completely flooding the marketplaces with shared stories. Section 2. Open source software. So if the Silk Road and the House of Wisdom were the hardware, 1001 Nights was the ultimate software running on it. And what's crucial to understand here is that the text we're analyzing doesn't actually have a single author. It is a literal open-source masterpiece of decentralized authorship. Different cultures acted exactly like modern developers, making commits to a cross-cultural codebase. You start with this ancient core of Persian and Indian folklore. Then you get 8th century Arabic translations. Next, vibrant urban legends get integrated directly from Baghdad. And finally, popular market narratives are supplemented straight from Cairo. It's an incredible cultural tapestry architecture. Section 3. The systemic crisis. But every great software requires a use case, right? A problem to solve. And this literature was necessitated by a catastrophic systemic failure at the highest level of government, the dictatorial backlash of King Shahryar. After uncovering his wife's infidelity, the king falls into an acute emotional crisis. He arrives at this terrifying absolute conclusion: no woman possesses structural integrity. His cognitive instability leads him to implement a brutal systemic protocol that would threaten the very foundation of his nation. He mandates wedding a new young maiden every single night, only to execute her the very next morning. I mean, this isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a systemic disaster. It causes a rapid, devastating depletion of the kingdom's human capital, driving widespread civic terror and completely destabilizing the families within his kingdom. The nation's people are literally being systematically wiped out by a tyrant's grief. Section 4. The operational play. So, the crucial point is how to resolve this systemic crisis. Enter Scheherazade. The highly educated, incredibly strategic daughter of the Grand Vizier sees the human resources of her territory facing total destruction, so she steps up. She intentionally overrides her own father's risk assessments and volunteers to marry the monarch. She is confronting raw, unyielding physical power, the literal execution blade, exclusively with the fragile currency of articulation and the optimization of human imagination. She isn't using a sword, right? She has designed an operational play based entirely on user psychology to suspend the execution cycle. Her strategy relies on a definitive technical breakthrough: nested frame narrative engineering. On her wedding night, coordinating carefully with her sibling, Dunyazade, she builds a literary labyrinth. Step 1, establish a primary structural frame. Step 2, execute localized stories inside that frame.
Step 3, have those characters spawn new characters who narrate even further tales. It's stories inside of stories inside of stories, an endless, totally complex loop.
But the architecture alone isn't going to stop an execution. The real genius is in the delivery. As dawn approaches, which is the exact moment she is scheduled to die, Scheherazade executes her core operational tactic. She intentionally bottlenecks the data flow, stopping the narrative arc at the absolute, undeniable peak of suspense. Captivated by this massive retention play, the king is absolutely desperate to secure the remaining data. So, what does he do? He trades one 24-hour life extension for the completion of the story. She successfully hacks his psychology to delay the execution protocol, and she closes this incredibly high-stakes loop not just once, but 1,001 times. Now, it is absolutely vital to understand she wasn't merely entertaining this guy. She was deploying a highly calculated therapeutic re-education mechanism. Through target allegories featuring jinns, mythical automation, incognito caliphs, and high-stakes moral stress tests, she was subtly healing his cognitive instability. She was essentially re-educating his executive framework on systemic justice, mercy, and the multi-layered realities of human behavior. By the end of the timeline, completely aligned with her intellect, he revokes the decree entirely, preserving her permanently. Section 5. The Legacy of Retention. Let's move to the modern era and see how this builds. How exactly did this 8th century survival asset shape the world you and I live in today? Well, just look at the globalization of this mythic brand. Translated in the 18th century by Antoine Galland, it completely redefined European perceptions of the Middle East. And because it was an open-source framework, totally new assets were added to the compilation. Aladdin, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, the Voyages of Sinbad, these didn't just stay in a book. They evolved into the universal icons of global cinema, animation, and the very architecture of modern mass entertainment. But the most profound legacy here isn't the characters. It's the structural engineering, the cliffhanger. We define it as the intentional disruption of data at the end of a streaming episode or season designed to force immediate audience retention. Scheherazade was literally the world's prototype narrative architect. The psychological feedback loop she engineered to disarm a tyrant is the exact foundational metric of audience attention economics used by the global streaming industry today. Which leaves us with a really critical thought to end this explainer on. We've seen how narrative intelligence can literally save lives and completely reshape human behavior. So if a medieval narrative architect could hack human psychology to disarm a tyrant and buy another day of life, what is today's entertainment architecture, the direct descendants of Shehrazade's playbook, hacking in you when you hit next episode? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll leave you to think on that.